Your feet have never touched this seafloor. Right now, as you read this, you are likely sitting somewhere stable. A chair, a couch, a bed. Your feet are planted or tucked under you on something solid and predictable. That feeling of the ground holding you, of knowing up from down, is a promise your nervous system makes to you every second of your life. It's a silent contract written over 200,000 years. The world is stable, and you are safe upon it. But out there, right now, the Pacific Ocean floor is dropping away. For every mile you travel from shore, the bottom falls another 5,000 feet. A few miles out, and you are floating over canyons deeper than the Himalayas are tall. The water beneath you is not blue, but black. It holds a cold that has never felt the sun, and a pressure that would collapse your lungs into liquid. If you were dropped into that water, your body's first instinct, to breathe, would kill you. Your second instinct, to swim, would be useless. Your ancient, land-loving nervous system would scream a single, futile command. Find the bottom. Find the ground. There is no ground. Only a 2-mile descent into a darkness older than our species. And yet, you are here. Because people like you, your direct ancestors, did not stay on the shore. They looked at that abyss, built something out of logs and vines and faith, and pushed off. They pointed themselves at a horizon that promised nothing, into waters that forgot every footprint, for a destination they could not see, could not smell, could not even prove existed. If even one of those voyages had failed, a chain of lives 10,000 links long would have snapped, and you would not be reading this. You exist because someone, once, was impossibly lost at sea and lived to tell about it. This is the central miracle of human migration, and we have gotten the story almost completely backwards. We imagine it as a slow, cautious creep, a tribe moving a few miles each generation as game herds shifted, hugging coastlines, terrified of the deep. A safe, sensible, land-based expansion. The reality, written in fragments of shell and stone across 10,000 islands, is far more terrifying and magnificent. Our ancestors didn't just cross oceans. They vanished into them on purpose. They sailed into the emptiness when they still had to chip their tools out of rock, when their greatest source of light was a campfire, when their best map was the pattern of stars they painted in their own minds. The question isn't if they did it. The bones and stones prove they did. The real, heart-stopping question is how. How do you navigate a featureless desert of water, bigger than all the continents combined, with no compass, no sextant, no chart? How do you survive weeks at sea, in a vessel you made with stone tools? How do you know where to go, when every wave looks the same, and every cloud could be hiding a storm that sends you to the bottom? The answer lies in a form of intelligence we have almost entirely forgotten. It's not in a tool they carried. It's in a layer of perception they carried in their flesh. To understand it, you have to start not with the boat, but with the body standing on the beach. You have to feel the crisis they faced, a crisis of such profound disorientation that it forced a rewrite of the human mind itself. Close your eyes for a moment, not to imagine a boat, but to feel your own balance. Even sitting still, your inner ear is a silent universe of liquid and tiny stones, tracking every minute shift. Your muscles are making micro-adjustments to keep you upright. Your eyes are confirming the horizon. This is your equilibrium, the quiet hum of a system evolved over millions of years for life on the savanna, where the ground is firm and the vistas are long. Now strip all that away. Place yourself on a raft. Not a modern yacht, but a lashed-together collection of logs. The ground is no longer solid. It is a living, heaving thing. It drops from under you, then rises to meet your knees. The horizon is no longer a steady line. It tilts, pivots, and slants wildly. Your inner ear, that perfect land navigator, is now your enemy. It screams contradictory signals. You are falling. You are rising. You are spinning. The cues from your eyes and your balance no longer match. Your stomach revolts. Your mind clouds. This is seasickness, but it's more than that. It is a fundamental system failure of your primary navigation hardware. In this state, you are not an explorer. You are prey. You cannot think clearly, fight effectively, or observe keenly. You are a nauseated, disoriented victim of physics. For 99.9% of our history, this was the absolute, impassable barrier. The deep ocean was not just dangerous. It was incomprehensible to our senses. It rendered our greatest evolutionary advantage, our complex brains, tuned for land, completely useless. So we clung to the shores. For tens of thousands of years, Homo sapiens spread across continents, but always with dirt beneath our feet. The map of humanity was a stain spreading slowly across Eurasia, Africa, the Americas, but it was a stain that always stopped at the water's edge. Then, something changed, and it didn't change where you'd expect. It wasn't in the Mediterranean, with its tame coasts and visible islands. It began in the place that should have been the most impossible, the most forbidding of all, the vast, star-scattered void of the Pacific. Around 50,000 years ago, people made the first great leap into the unknown, crossing over 100 miles of open ocean from Southeast Asia to reach Australia. They saw smoke from wildfires on a distant horizon no land was supposed to be on, and they went toward it. But that, as staggering as it was perhaps a taste. The true test, the one that defies every instinct of the land-ape brain, came later. Around 3,000 years ago, a culture emerged that looked at the greatest ocean on Earth, a canvas of blue covering a third of the planet, and saw not a barrier, but a pathway. We know them as the Lapita, the Polynesian ancestors. They lived on islands already, places like the Bismarcks and Solomons. They had food, safety, established lives. The world, by any rational measure, was already theirs. Yet they did something that makes no sense to the modern, risk-assessing mind. They built double-hulled canoes the length of a school bus from hollowed-out logs, loaded them with families, pregnant women, children, pigs, chickens, taro seedlings, and every scrap of their known world. And then, with a courage so profound it feels like a different species, they sailed east, into the rising sun, into the prevailing wind and current. Think about that direction for a moment. Sailing east meant sailing against the dominant flow of the Pacific. It meant every mile was hard-won. It meant that if they failed, if they grew weak or lost hope, the natural currents would not gently carry them home. They would carry them farther out, into the infinite blue. This was not a drift voyage. This was a deliberate, planned, and terrifyingly permanent act of abandonment. They were burning the bridge of return with every stroke of the paddle. And their goal? There was none. No map showed another island. No bird migration path guaranteed a landfall. No story, no legend, no ancient memory told them what lay beyond a few days' sail. They were sailing into a void so complete, their own language had a word for it. Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, the great ocean of Kiwa, an expanse so vast it was personified as a god. They were committing their children's lives to a hypothesis written in wave patterns and cloud shapes. They found islands, not by accident, but by design. They pinpointed specks of land smaller than a pixel on a global map, across thousands of miles of open ocean. They found Hawaii. They found Easter Island. They found New Zealand. They dotted the Pacific Triangle with their settlements. The greatest navigational achievement in human history, accomplished with technology from the Stone Age. So how? How could they possibly do it? The old textbooks gave a comforting, simple answer. They drifted. They got lucky. They clung to wreckage and washed up somewhere. It's a theory that protects our modern ego. Of course, they couldn't really navigate. They were primitive. They just got lucky. But the archaeology leaves no room for this patronizing fantasy. The settlements they left behind are not random scars of survival. They are deliberate, identical cultural fingerprints. The same distinct pottery, the same tools, the same domesticated animals appear on islands separated by voyages that take weeks, sailing against the wind. You do not drift a family, a pig, a potted plant, and a specific style of art to a new island. You bring them with intent. The truth is so much more astonishing than luck. It requires us to believe that these voyagers developed a form of knowing. We have systematically educated out of ourselves. They became living instruments. Their school was the ocean itself, and their curriculum was written in the feel of the waves against the hull, the taste of the air on the tongue, and the dance of the stars on the water's surface. They learned to see the invisible, and the first, most vital clue they used to find land, from over 100 miles out at sea, was not something they saw at all. It was something they felt in their bones, a deep, resonant message from the ocean itself, a message that is still being sent, right now, to every beach on Earth. And if you know how to listen, you can feel its echo in your own body today, a silent testament to the voyagers who coded the secret into their very souls. The crisis was absolute. You are on that canoe. The land is a memory behind you, swallowed by the curve of the earth. Ahead is only water, meeting a blank sky. Your modern mind knows the tools for this. A GPS, a compass, a satellite image. You have none of that. You have a brain built for remembering where the berry bushes grow on the savanna, for tracking a hoofprint in the dust. Here, there are no berries. No prints. The water erases your path the moment your wake closes. Every sensory anchor you evolved with is gone. The panic is not just emotional. It is biological. Your system is screaming for a fixed point, a here from which to measure there, and there is none. This is when the old theory says you would have prayed to the gods, or simply given up. But the Polynesian voyagers did something else. They stopped fighting the disorientation. They surrendered to it, and in that surrender, they began to detect a pattern in the chaos. Close your eyes again, not on the raft this time, but sitting where you are. Clench your fist tightly, then release it. Feel the blood return, that subtle, deep pulse. That is your body sensing a wave of pressure, not from your heart, but from your own grip. Now, imagine that sensation, but coming from the planet itself. Because the ocean, for all its seeming emptiness, is not silent. It is humming. Every island, from a continent to a lone volcanic peak, interrupts the endless sweep of the ocean swell. It creates a shadow, not a shadow of darkness, but a shadow of calm, a subtle rebellion in the rhythm of the sea. Out in the deep Pacific, swells are born by winds blowing over thousands of miles of open water. These are not the surface waves that break on a beach. These are immense, rolling hills of water, moving with a slow, powerful heartbeat. They can be a foot high from trough to crest, but their length, the distance between one peak and the next, can stretch for half a mile or more. They are the ocean's deepest breath. And when these oceanic swells meet an island, something profound happens. The island acts like a stone in a river. The swell parts, wrapping around the land. Some of its energy is reflected back out to sea. The result, extending for 100 miles or more downwind of the island, is an interference pattern, a quiet, chaotic patchwork where the dominant, organized swell rhythm breaks down into a confused, bumpy sea. To your modern eye, looking at a flat blue horizon, this would mean nothing. It would just look like rough water. But to a voyager who had trained their body to be a seismograph, this was a billboard. They couldn't see the island, but they could feel the island's echo in the way the canoe moved. Here is the twist, the beautiful, counterintuitive genius of it. Seasickness, that debilitating system failure, was not just an obstacle to be overcome. It became the primary instrument. To navigate, they had to become exquisitely, painfully sensitive to the motion of the canoe. They had to listen with their skin, their inner ear, their gut. A modern sailor fights seasickness. To think clearly. The Polynesian navigator cultivated a state of deep physical awareness through the disorientation, learning to differentiate the long, rolling groundswell from the shorter, choppy reflected waves. The very thing that should have made them helpless became their sixth sense. They lay down in the canoe. They let their bodies go limp, like a reed in the current, and they paid attention. They felt for the transition from the clean, rhythmic lift and fall of the open ocean to the jumbled, irregular Polynesia, the trouble that whispered of land ahead. It was a tactile sonar, using their own nausea as a tuning fork. This was the first and most critical clue, the feel of the sea. But the ocean spoke to them in more than one language. If the swell was its deep, rhythmic pulse, then the clouds were its fleeting expressions. Look at the sky on a normal day. Clouds seem random, drifting sculptures. Now, imagine you are a voyager who has studied the face of the sky for a lifetime. You see a small, stationary cloud on an otherwise clear horizon. It seems to be pinned in place, while others drift past. That cloud is not just sitting there. It is being formed. An island, especially a volcanic one, heats the air above it. That warm, moist air rises until it hits the cooler upper atmosphere and condenses into a cloud. Often, this creates a characteristic cloud pile that hangs over the island like a permanent marker. Even at incredible distances, the faint greenish tint reflected from an island's lagoon could be mirrored in the underside of a cloud, a ghost of land painted on the sky. And then, there were the travelers who could not turn back, the birds, specifically the Manu o Ku, the birds of Ku, like the white tern. These birds fish the open sea by day, but they must return to land to roost at night. Their flight paths at dusk are not random. They are arrows. A navigator watching the determined, unwavering flight of certain seabirds at sunset had a compass line pointing directly to an unseen island. The radius of this clue was smaller, maybe 40 or 50 miles, but within that circle, it was an absolute guarantee. Land was there, in the direction the birds flew with such urgent purpose. So they felt the swell, read the clouds, followed the birds. But this still leaves the heart-stopping question. How did they know where to sail in the first place? How did they point their canoe at a vacant spot on the horizon and say, "There, an island will be there," when the nearest land was over 1,000 miles away? This is where the story moves from brilliant observation to something that feels like preternatural memory. They carried the map inside their minds. Not a drawn map, but a living, star-based conceptual model. We call this star compass. Imagine the night sky not as a random spray of diamonds, but as a dome tattooed with pathways. Every star, as it rises from the eastern horizon and arcs across the sky to set in the west, defines a bearing line. The Polynesian navigator memorized the rising and setting points of over 150 stars. Each point on the horizon, north, east, south, west, and every nuanced point in between, was named for the star that rose or set there. Their canoe was not just a physical vessel. It was a stationary point in a rotating celestial sphere. They did not think, "I am sailing north." They thought, "I am keeping the rising point of the star Hokulea Arcturus directly off the bow of my canoe." As that star rose and moved, they would switch to the next star whose rising point marked the same bearing. They sailed a course glued to the heavens themselves. But stars move with the seasons, so their mental compass had multiple, layered wheels, one for the summer sky, one for the winter sky. And on cloudy nights, when the stars vanished, they felt the swell. The primary ocean swells, generated by consistent trade winds or distant storms, maintained a constant direction for days or weeks at a time. They became a moving true north, etched into the water's motion. A navigator could lie down, feel the dominant swell's direction against the hull, and maintain course through a pitch-black night, blindfolded by touch alone. They were integrating data streams no modern instrument combines: celestial geometry, fluid dynamics, meteorology, and animal behavior, all processed through a human body tuned to a level of sensitivity we would call supernatural. It was a science of correlation, built over generations of voyages, where every clue was cross-referenced. The swell feels confused and the clouds have a greenish tint, and a flock of terns is flying steadily southeast at dusk. Land is not just likely, it is a fact. Turn the canoe. And the most staggering evidence that this was a repeatable, teachable science is not just that they found islands, it's that they could go back. They could return to their home island, against the wind and current, to report the discovery, and bring more families. This was not a one-way suicide mission. It was a controlled, expandable exploration. The oral traditions are filled with stories of navigators like Moika and Hawaiiloa, who made specific voyages to specific islands and returned. They were not lost. They were commuting across a water continent. The final, concrete proof of their intentional mastery lies not in the legends, but in the garbage heaps. The archaeological record of the Lapita people shows a sudden, explosive spread. Around 1200 BC, they appear in the islands of Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa. Their signature pottery, intricately stamped with geometric patterns, is a perfect cultural fingerprint. Then, after a pause of centuries, the expansion explodes again. Around 900 AD, their descendants reach the most remote corners of the Pacific: Tahiti, the Marquesas, Hawaii, Rapa Nui, Easter Island, and finally, Aotearoa, New Zealand. The voyage to New Zealand was one of the longest single leaps. Over 2,500 miles of cold, tempestuous ocean. They didn't drift there. They sailed there, on a calculated voyage. That would have required waiting for a seasonal shift in the wind patterns, a temporary window in the weather that allowed them to make that southern thrust. They timed their conquest of the impossible, and when they landed, they brought their world with them. The archaeological sites on these islands are not just camps of stranded survivors. They are complete transplantations. They brought the crops: taro, yam, breadfruit, coconut. They brought the animals: pigs, chickens, dogs. They brought the technology, the precise style of adze for carving, the exact method of pottery making. This is the ultimate rebuttal to the drifter theory. You cannot accidentally drift a pregnant pig across 1,000 miles of ocean. That pig was packed, fed, watered, and carried as a deliberate act of colonization. It was a statement: we are not visiting. We are arriving to stay. The modern experiments seal the case. In the 1970s, a movement began to prove this knowledge wasn't just legend. The Hokulea, a replica of a traditional double-hulled voyaging canoe, was built in Hawaii. Navigators like the late Maupielug, a master from the tiny Micronesian island of Satawal where the old ways were still kept, volunteered to guide it. Without instruments, using only the stars, swell, birds, and clouds, Pielug navigated the Hocule from Hawaii to Tahiti, a 2,500-mile journey in 1976. It wasn't a fluke. It has been repeated dozens of times since, training a new generation of non-instrument navigators. Science watched, measured, and had to admit, it works. It is a real, empirical, and devastatingly effective system. The human body, properly educated, can feel its way across an ocean. So the crisis, the total sensory bankruptcy of the open sea, did not defeat them. It trained them. They turned the deficit into the data. Where we see meaningless waves, they felt grammar. Where we see random clouds, they saw signatures. Where we see a blank horizon, they saw a star-locked highway. And this legacy is not locked in the past. It is written into your perception of the world in a way you've likely never noticed. You have lost the conscious skill, but the template remains. That subtle disorientation you feel on a boat, that primal unease, that is the ghost of their instrument. We have simply covered that layer with a cacophony of digital certainty. We outsourced the navigation to a satellite and silenced the ancient, whispering sense in our bones. But on a deep, still level, the connection remains. Because every time you look at a map and feel a strange pull toward an empty blue expanse, or stand on a shore and feel not fear but a quiet, expansive yearning, you are touching the remnant of that rewrite. You are feeling the echo of the choice to not just cling to the land, but to dissolve into the blue, trusting that the body could learn the language of the abyss. The voyage never really ended. It just moved inward.